Welcome to the Roundtable Evaluation and Transformational Change, the Power of Feminist Approaches. I am Claudia Olavarría. I'm the coordinator of gLOCAL Evaluation Week and part of the GEI team. And I will be your host today with the support of my colleague, Megan Cook. So please, as I told you before, introduce yourself in the chat. We want to know your name, your organization, and what country you're connecting from before. This event today is hosted by the Global Evaluation Initiative. It is a global partnership that supports developing country governments to strengthen their monitoring and evaluation systems and the use of evidence in their own countries. So we're hosting this event today as part of the Feminist Innovation for Monitoring and Evaluation project, the FIME project. And this is a project implemented by GEI with the support of Global Affairs Canada. We have the honor to have members of our reference group in this session today. So many thanks to Mrs. Florencia Tatiosian from UN Women and Mrs. Florence Eta from Gensa for being part of this event and for all your help with the FIME project. We really appreciate it. Today, we're delighted to have this space to discuss about evaluation and transformational change and the ways that evaluation, particularly feminist evaluation, can contribute to this transformational change. This webinar is not a standalone effort, but is part of a series of webinars and builds on the debate that we had back in March while commemorating International Women's Day. If you could not attend that webinar then, it was very interesting. We will share the reference with you in the chat so you can take a look at how that conversation went. We are understanding transformational change as those systemic and sustainable changes that are needed to tackle the most pressing development challenges, such as gender equality and social justice, and many others, especially these days. gLOCAL 2024 is a feast with more than 370 events happening around the world. And this number of events, together with the 270 different organizers, evidences the diversity of our field and the diversity of our own evaluation practice. But today we're here to discuss about feminist evaluation because we are convinced that feminist evaluation is better evaluation and that in many cases the use of a feminist lens to evaluation can allow us to increase the quality of our work and provide stronger evidence to sustain transformational change. So feminist evaluation can contribute by understanding change in the frame of certain social and cultural systems within their power dynamics, using participatory and empowering methods to question this, among others. But we will go deeper into this discussion with a great panel today. Many thanks to Dr. Donna Mertens, Dr. Donna Podems, and Dr. Sonal Zaveri for being part of this effort. Please, for our distinguished audience, write your questions and write your comments in the chat. We will try to answer them during the conversation. And without further ado, let me introduce our first panelist. We have today here with us Dr. Donna Mertens. She's a professor emeritus at Gallaudet University. She specializes in transformative research and evaluation methodologies that support social, economic, and environmental justice and human rights. She consults with such organizations as the UN International Fund for Agricultural Development, UN Women, Engineers Without Borders, among many others. Donna has served as the editor of the Journal of Mixed Method Research. She has been president of the American Evaluation Association and a founding board member of International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation and Mixed Methods International Research Association. Dear Donna, it's an honor to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here to be with this wonderful group. I have this feeling that I'm here amongst family and friends because the connections go for a deep am long in terms of connections with the people who are on the panel and the people who you have mentioned in your introduction as being supporters of this. My presentation is titled Transformative Evaluation and Feminist Approaches. And for people who are familiar with my work, you know that my stance is there's nothing quite as practical as a good philosophical framework. And I know that the March roundtable on feminist evaluation was one that kind of focused on why this is important, what it can contribute, and that the desire here is to have, well, what does that mean in practice? What are some examples of the application of that? And so I want to frame my remarks in terms of giving you examples, but framing it through this lens of transformation and feminist theory. And my work really has been this development of what are the assumptions that guide us when we make a commitment to an increase in justice through our evaluation work, a commitment to address inequities. And so for this presentation, I looked at my philosophical framework and I looked at what I have seen and written about in terms of the tenets of feminist approaches to evaluation and said, where is the explicit overlap and what gets contributed when we put these in conversation with each other, when we put a transformative philosophical framework in conversation with a feminist theoretical approach. And so I have highlighted then in bold in this slide to say that if we're starting with an assumption about ethics and values, that what we need to do is be culturally responsive. That is 100% in alignment with the feminist approach. Promotion of social, environmental, and economic justice and human rights, addressing inequities front and center in feminist arguments. Reciprocity, giving back to the communities that we do our evaluations with or in, and looking at the resilience of those communities and recognizing our interconnectedness with everything and building those relationships. And in looking at the concept, well, if we situate ourselves that way, then what does that mean about understanding phenomena that we are trying to understand in our evaluations? So we might talk about that philosophically as the nature of reality, that it's multifaceted, that whose version of reality is given privilege has consequences. And the feminists have absolutely brought us into that domain of saying, listen to women's voices, listen to the voices of women, understand the historical concept, a historical context in which women live, and importantly, that women are not women, that there is diversity when we talk about women. And that brings us centrally to this concept of intersectionality and the bases of discrimination that are functioning in the context. It makes a difference if you are a lesbian woman who lives in a country where homosexuality is against the law. It makes a difference if you are a deaf Black woman. And so looking at that intersectionality and the basis of discrimination is something that comes out from both transformative and feminist. And epistemologically, saying we need to be interactive, we need to build trust, the idea of building coalitions so that there's a group of people who work together during the evaluation, but that sustain the effort when the evaluation ends. I think that's a very important contribution. Addressing power inequities and multiple ways of knowing. So valuing the knowledge that comes up from communities, and that's our epistemological stance. And then methodologically bringing us to a transformative lens, being dialogic, being culturally responsive, using mixed methods, including contextual analyses, and policy change. And those are things that the feminists have absolutely alerted us to, that working in a stance of advocacy and towards action is, it aligns with both the transformative and the feminist approaches to evaluation. So in my work now, particularly, I've been working a lot with different UN organizations and with the State Department. And in reviewing their manuals on evaluation and reviewing the evaluations that they've done, I was tasked with saying, well, what needs to be addressed here that hasn't been sufficiently addressed? And these are the challenges that arose. One is looking at gender as a binary concept and saying it's men and women, or it's girls and boys. But there are many dimensions of gender. And if we don't pay attention to that, then we leave people behind. That disability is not present as much as gender. So that's a concept of intersectionality, bringing disability together with gender. And the language is now very much reflective of talking about getting at the root causes of gender inequality, gender roles, norms, powers. And what we need to ask ourselves is, how do our methodologies actually lead us to address those root causes? So the negative attitudes and social norms, lack of resources and capacity, lack of accessibility, lack of institutional commitment and political will, and the lack of data and evidence. So I want to present you with a couple of examples where bringing this transformative feminist lens to the evaluation illustrates the application of those principles that I've been talking to you about. So the first example is from Pakistan, and it was conducted by Stoker and her colleagues for UN Women. And it was looking at an evaluation of women home-based workers. So it was an economic empowerment program. One of the really great things was that the evaluators themselves were from Pakistan. So they had an understanding of the complexity, the culture, the history of women who might be working from home. They formed relationships with the UN staff, the funders, women with disabilities, those who were in the lowest degrees of poverty, and trans women. So they're saying, we know that within our culture, there are certain groups of women, that intersectionality idea, who are more inclined to work from home. And so then they conducted a contextual analysis to understand better, what did that mean? And in their analysis, what they found was that women with disabilities are homebound for a number of reasons. One of those is the cultural belief that there is something wrong when you have a person with disability in your family. So there's a stigma attached. And so those women are not brought out into public. The other are accessibility issues, that there is not the structure in place to provide access for them to travel, to have employment outside the home, and so forth. They also collected data about the stigma attached to being a trans woman and the discrimination that these women experience. And so for their safety, they might make the choice to work from home. So they had their evaluation methodology defined by the UN that was saying, use mixed methods, use a rights-based gender responsive approach. And they were like, yes, that's a good idea. And I completely endorse that idea. But then they said, you know what? What we have to do, and this gets to those root causes, is to say, what are the structural barriers? What are the social norms that are preventing these women from benefiting from the program that we have for economic empowerment? And so they've changed the methodology a bit, particularly with regard to collecting data from women with disabilities, where they said what we'll need to do then is to go to the small villages, to go to where the women with disabilities are and do case studies so that we get that understanding of the context and what they're experiencing. They also tried to conduct interviews with trans women. They were not very successful with that. So I want in the next example to show you how using a different strategy, it might be possible to bring those women into the evaluation. What they found was that women with disabilities told them that they had never left their homes until these people from the evaluation came to speak with them about their experiences. And so then they needed to completely change the model, the intervention model, to say, instead of having these women travel to a center to get training, we need to bring the training to them. We need to have support persons with them, whether it's family members or other support persons. And so they agreed to change the approach to that. So I think this is a really super example. Another example is from Robin Miller and her colleagues, who was working on issues related to gay and bisexual men and transgender women. And what they said was, look, these people are in a context, and they were in countries where this is considered to be illegal, punishable by prison or by death. And so what they did was approach it as an activist evaluation, where they built, where they built relationships with a collaborative of an activist agency, experts, identity groups. They looked at the legislative statutes, they documented violence, they interviewed people, and then they had people from the activist agency, from the identity groups, who said, we want to develop the instrument ourselves. We want it to reflect what we want in this. And I know that my time is getting short, so I'll just wrap it up by saying that they were able to use this information for transformative purposes, developing training materials, having new facilities that were responsive to this population open, having action plans in the facilities in which the evaluation took place. I write all the time. I'm an obsessive writer. So these are some of the books where I've talked about transformative approaches and feminism. I also have some additional resources. I have the links to the two studies that I mentioned. And I also have a link to my website, transformativeresearchandevaluation.com, where there's a lot of resources that relate to this. So with that, I'll close. And thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Donna, for sharing, for inspiring us. And I am very happy that you're an obsessive writer. That way we can back with your thoughts and things that are happening around you. So thank you very much for those reflections. Without any doubt, the transformative paradigm is great help to frame our work in a much coherent way. And we have discussed about this previously very much, because I'm personally a fan of it. Regarding the questions, Donna, we have two questions in the Q&A. So the first one is for me regarding presentations, and the second one is for you, if you want to address it. I will share in the chat the resources that Donna has shared, so people can have it and take a look at those. And now, without further doing, I will present our next panelist, Dr. Donna Podems. She's a feminist evaluator who brings 25 years of experience with a range of evaluation methodologies for various interventions, especially in agriculture, early childhood development, education, environment, health systems, and other areas. Donna has served on multiple national and evaluation boards, and currently she's a board member of the International Evaluation Academy. She's a senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg and a senior fellow of Stellenbosch University. So she has published several books, journals, articles, and blogs, same as Donna was just sharing. And her most recent feminist evaluation book will be published later this year or early 2025. We're looking for that, Donna, without any doubt. And she's here today to talk about that feminist model. So Donna, please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very intimidating to be wedged between Sonal and Donna. So I will definitely do my best. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, everyone.
Don't worry. There you go.
Okay, so very difficult to sum up an entire book and 15 years of work in 10 minutes, but I'm going to do my best. So try and keep up with me because here we go. I wanted to start off by addressing and talking about why use a feminist approach at all, because the second I mention a feminist approach, I'm usually hit with about 5 or 6 key questions I've heard over the past 20 years, and they never change. And one of them is why not a human rights approach? And I have to say that one stumped me for a long time. Why not a human rights approach? When I'm in the field and I'm trying to be practical with a feminist approach, what I try to do is find something that everyone can relate to. Why not a human rights approach? Because women are, we're not doing so great in some areas. And I like to throw out some statistics. If I'm talking to a general group like I am today, I might point out the fact that 2.4 billion women of working age are not afforded equal economic opportunity, and 178 countries maintain legal barriers that prevent women's full economic participation. So, that's kind of one reason. There's another one, a bit older statistic here. Globally, 62 million girls are denied an education. Sorry, I'm just moving this out of my way. And a shout out to my kind of fellow South Africans. I'm a paper South African. I've lived in South Africa for 25 years. But here's a stat I don't think we're very proud of. South Africa is considered to be the rape capital of the world, with 10,818 rape cases reported in the first quarter of 2022. The rate at which women are killed by intimate partners is 5 times higher than the global average. So there's a reason locally to be involved in feminist evaluation. And here's a more general one from 2021 from the WHO. And I found this rather shocking. Well, all of it's rather shocking. Across a woman's lifetime, 1 in 3 women, that's around 736 million women, are subjected to physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or sexual violence from a non-partner that has remained unchanged for the past decade. Here's a stat we'd like to throw out sometimes from COVID. While men are 2.4 times more likely to die from COVID-19, this is coming out of the UK, women are twice as likely to be killed by their male partners in lockdown. This is an older stat, but one that just rings in my head all the time. American women serving in Iraq or Afghanistan were more likely to be raped by a comrade than killed by an enemy. So those are personal reasons, local reasons, global reasons why we need to promote and talk about the advantages, as Donna just did, of feminist evaluation. But also globally, it's important. If you look at some of the global movements that are happening around the world, I've just picked out 2 here. One is the Sustainable Development Goal, number 5, and also number 10 addresses it as well. And it talks about equity and equality being important, gender equality, being important. And it also says at the very end, it says there's been progress over the last decade, but the world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. And I think that's a little bit of an understatement, because the World Economic Forum actually reported in 2023 that we're kind of looking at about another 131 years to reach gender parity. Many of you are probably aware of the global feminist backlash that's happening around the world, where feminist arguments are being discredited, often with a lot of aggression and open hostility. So often these are some of the reasons that might resonate with your colleagues, your clients, or people that you're trying to talk to about feminist evaluation and the need for it. If that's not resonating with the people you're engaging with, what about with the evaluation profession in particular? If you look around the world right now, a lot of VOPEs, which are the voluntary organizations for professional evaluation, are looking for ways to support women and gender equality. Agden is here in Africa, the Feminist TIG in USA. You can see I have a small list on the right, and there are many more. These different organizations, these VOPEs, these groups, they need appropriate methodologies and approaches to be able to support what they do. I also wanted to briefly touch on some of the challenges that I face when using feminist evaluation, because I feel that that gets glossed over quite a bit. There are a lot of challenges out there for using it, more so than when I write about or I use utilization focused or democratic or realist or empowerment evaluation. You know, they have such lovely names and they're great approaches. But when I try to use feminist evaluation, I often run into some very similar challenges. One is people are offended by the name. You know, the second I say feminist evaluation, people might say, I don't like that approach. And I'm always like, well, tell me what you know about the approach. A lot of time, it's the name. The other challenge we have in implementing and talking about and doing feminist evaluation is that there's a lot of different names and labels and approaches out there: gender feminist, gender transformative, gender responsive, and so on. And unfortunately, we as a global evaluation community do not always use labels appropriately, correctly, in the right way. Donna Mertens mentioned Robin Miller. She was also a colleague of mine, also from Michigan State. She did a journal article with her colleagues a number of years ago where they pulled, I have to make up these numbers, but I don't know, something like over 100 articles or 80 articles that were listed as empowerment evaluation. And when they went through those articles, they found very few that actually were. So this is not something that's particular to feminist evaluation, but it does come up quite a bit. What do we mean by feminist evaluation? What are the differences with the gender approaches? The third challenge I'm usually faced with in using feminist evaluation is where to start. How do you start? How do you introduce this approach? And how do you use it in the field? So I'm going to go through a few of these other challenges. Again, just the more popular ones over the past 20 years. I get this question quite a bit. Does an evaluator need to be a feminist to implement feminist evaluation? My answer, and people have different answers, but my answer to that is no, you do not need to be a feminist to implement feminist evaluation. And I speak based on the fact that I've done a number of feminist evaluations or evaluations that are influenced by feminist approaches with fellow colleagues and fellow evaluators who did not identify as feminist, yet were very much in support of the approach of bringing in feminist evaluation or having feminist evaluation lead that. And I have some articles that I've written for examples on that as well. So in limited time, let me introduce you to where I ended up with developing and presenting to you today the feminist principle evaluation. And it emerged actually over a long period of time. And when I was actually putting the resources together for the presentation today, I was like, actually, I'm not at the end of my presentation. These are my resources or my sources, some of my sources, but it actually tells a story of how I ended up developing feminist principles evaluation. Way back in 2000, this article is actually on the top left, the green book was published in 2002, but it was the first time I was introduced to feminist evaluation was in 2000, and I really didn't know a lot about it. I was very lucky to co-write that article with a colleague who knew more than I did, and it was fascinating, but I came out of it still not understanding the difference between feminist and gender approaches. Was there a difference, and what was it? And I wrote that article and submitted it to the American Journal of Evaluation in 2006, and it was not only rejected, but it was rejected quite strongly that it was not written academically. I didn't write academically enough, that it was something people were not interested in, and so on. It was 3 pages of pretty harsh and personal criticism. I stepped back for a while and finally got up enough energy again and confidence to submit the article again, and it was published in 2010. After that, though, I really started thinking, well, what does feminist evaluation really mean, though? How do you actually implement that? And I really tried to implement it in different countries and different forums and different themes. And that experience ended up being an article that is in the blue book on the lower left, Feminist Evaluation and Research, where I really struggled with how to do feminist evaluation in a very practical way. So my thinking on feminist evaluation was starting to emerge. But I came out of the Feminist Evaluation and Research book with some other ideas about how to implement feminist evaluation, And I started reading a new approach that was brought out by Michael Patton called principle-focused evaluation. And I started testing the idea of merging principle-focused, so using principles, with feminist evaluation. And I presented that and ended up publishing an article in the African Development Bank Journal. That's the orange one that's on there. And eventually I was able to take all of these ideas, put them together, test them out in many different places. And eventually we ended up, you see the top right there, behind the scenes of a feminist principles evaluation with the CGIAR. If you're interested in a resource of where I ended up, that's an early look at using the approach that shows how the principles were used. There's a blog, there's a full evaluation, and I also uploaded the methodology. A summary of the PFE then, based on refining it with the CGIAR, is coming out actually this month in Kathy Newcomer and Steve Mumford's book. And I'm chapter 10, Feminist Principles Evaluation. So I thought I wanted to take all of you listening today through my journey of coming up with feminist principles evaluation, which really was an over 20-year journey of understanding how to put it together in a way that I think and hope other people will find useful. So let me show you what it is. Feminist principles evaluation is very much an evaluation approach, which means that you need to understand evaluation in order to implement it. It's also based on feminist principles or feminist values that are integrated or infused into the evaluation approach. But please do not forget, it is, at its heart, an evaluation approach. These are the 9 principles. They're a bit small, but the idea is that there is an overarching principle which guides every single feminist evaluation. And the main idea for the overarching principle is to use evaluation to support transformational change for women that paves the way for gender equality. Underneath that are 9 operational or 9 effectiveness principles that will help you develop, design, implement, and then evaluate yourself on whether or not you actually implemented a feminist principle evaluation. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go through all 9 principles.
Donna, I think we can make time for the principles. Resting. Sure.
No, I don't want to cut into Sonal's time. So let me see where I wrap up. And Claudia, if I've got an extra minute left, I'll go back to them. Okay. I promised Sonal I wouldn't go over. When should PFE be used? I've come up with 6 questions that you can use to begin to think about whether or not PFE is the right approach for your context. It's not right for every context. It is not right for every evaluation. It is not right for every evaluator. Michael Patton has a video out that shows that there's over 101 different kinds of evaluation out there, evaluation approaches, models, theories, and so on. You need to actually think about, is feminist principles evaluation useful to me? And here's the 6 questions you can ask yourself. Look at the context. Does it warrant this kind of approach? Look at number 2. Are there interventions that you need to be looking at in terms of shifting power relations or issues around inequality? Number 3, what about the process would be enhanced by using one, if not more, of these principles? Number 4, looking around data collection. Number 5, thinking about the analysis process. And number 6, the communication of findings. So as we know, as evaluators, we often mix and match our approaches, right? So you might use principle 6 to help you enhance how to analyze your data. You might use principle 2, how to enhance your way of engaging with the evaluation process. It's there for guidance for you as an evaluator to be able to practically implement feminist evaluation. Okay, it's a model. So why do I use feminist evaluation? I particularly use the model that I'm working on because I think it forces me to see the world and evaluations in very different ways. When you listen, you've listened to Donna Mertens, you'll be listening to Sonal Zaveri in a few moments. We're feminists, but we also have different ways of seeing the world, and you need to open your eyes up to that, and FPE helps me do that. In doing that, it broadens my understanding and leads to deeper insights and more realistic recommendations in my evaluations even when I don't label them as feminist evaluation. Importantly, it encourages me to ask difficult questions in discussions and provides a theoretical backing to do so. And I think this is one of the weaker, when I've read other feminist evaluations, gender approaches, one of the weaker elements. Feminist evaluation is evaluation. It needs to be empirical. When we're standing up there and promoting feminist evaluation, or talking about the findings from a feminist evaluation, it needs to be based on empirical data. It needs to be a credible evaluation with credible data and credible evidence. Okay. The feminist principles evaluation model allows us to stand on solid ground. It's based on various different theories that I go into depth on in the book and in the chapter that's coming out this month. For me, I also think that principled feminist evaluation makes me a better evaluator because it helps me to uphold my values. By giving me those 9 principles, I constantly can check myself, my team can check me, and we can make sure that we actually are implementing actionable feminist principles, right? It gives us the guidance to do that. I want to just wrap up, and then if I have time, I'll jump back to the principles. But I wanted to say, I was introduced as a feminist evaluator, and I do identify as that sometimes. But I am a feminist and an evaluator, and sometimes I identify as a feminist evaluator. For me, FPE delivers a framework where you can implement practically feminist evaluation. It gives you the space to ask difficult questions on privilege, on discrimination. It guides me in how to facilitate those discussions, and it supports me to adhere to my own values. I feel that FPE gives us standing to identify and explore multiple socially constructed systems. Also, Donna talked about this as well, and how discrimination significantly influences women's lived experience. FPE for me deepens my understanding, and it leads to deeper and richer insights and more realistic recommendations to improve, enhance, and inform interventions, programs, and policies. For me, in developing this over 20 years, I feel that FPE supports me to be an evaluator who co-creates evaluative processes that aim to change the world one gender inequity at a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Donna, for your valuable views. We don't have time to review the 9 principles, but it's a good thing so you can share them with us and we can review further and look for your book that's coming out as you've just shared. Super interesting and super useful to have a set of principles to guide our own practice. So as I told you, I can't wait to see them in detail. And for now, I am going to introduce our 3rd panelist. Our 3rd presentation will be delivered by Dr. Sonal Zaveri. Sonal is the co-chair of Eval Gender Plus. She's the board member of the International Development Evaluation Association, IDEAS, and a board member of the International Evaluation Academy. She's founder of the Gender and Equity Network of South Asia, GENSA, and she performs as an independent consultant. Dear Sonal, I know your CV is huge. There are tons of interesting experiences from Asia and abroad that you're going to share with us. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And I'm really eager to step in and share my experiences. So I'm going to share my screen. And just to note that I'm going to be talking a little differently. And I'm going to be talking from real life experiences that I have gone through living in South Asia. And if Donna shared with you some of those world statistics, just amplify it maybe 10 times, 20 times, because the inequities that exist in South Asia, the huge numbers we work with, the intersectionality, the discrimination, casteism, patriarchy, traditionalism, there is so much that we live, we breathe, and we work in every single day. And I think it has been, I believe, a privilege that I, as an evaluator, as a development professional, had the opportunities to actually work with communities and try to understand what can we learn, how do we listen, and how do we apply our tools and craft. So all of this has come from my experience, And I'll be providing some links to what I've written about so that you could go in a bit deeper about it. I just wanted to say that I'm jumping off from what both Donna Mertens and Donna Podems have discussed, and I'm going to get into a bit of the nuts and bolts of how we do it. I also wanted to mention that, South Asia is very, very rich in work on gender. So we have a lot of gender professionals, feminists, activists, movements. We are rich in that. But if you try to combine that with evaluation, we have very little expertise on that. So it's really important for us to bring these two bodies of professionals together, and so that we can learn from them. And this is a lesson that I have learned in my practice. This is just a very quick refresher, and I'm coming in after two wonderful presentations of what is a feminist worldview. But what I wanted to say is that we need to understand their program experiences and how the program has impacted the change in their realities. And I cannot stress that enough. We come in from our point of view, but we need to understand what is happening in the lives of the people whom we are going to understand from and learn from. So as I said, I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts. Often people say, all right, so we want to do gender transformative evaluations, and that's a buzzword now. And we believe in feminist evaluation, but really, how am I going to do it? So here are some examples, and I'm going to provide two of them. So this one is coming from a real-time evaluation that I did, the gender integration and effectiveness of the UNICEF COVID-19 response in South Asia. And as I said, I'll provide a link to that. And I had the opportunity to work for a whole year during COVID with all the 8 countries in South Asia. I'm going to talk about one of the case studies that I worked with. Now, just wanted to, give a bit of, it's gone further, give a background that this is about Suchna Prayers. Suchna means information. And we invited the different countries in South Asia to suggest a case study that they would wanted to work on. And the criteria was that they considered it to be gender responsive. They believed that they were empowering women. And then we wanted to analyze it to see how transformative it was, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to take a deep dive into the analysis, and we wanted to work with the country offices as well as the implementing partners. So the implementing partner over here, just to give a background, they had various resource centers that provided digital literacy, and the information entrepreneurs were appointed to outreach in the communities. Remember, this was the time of COVID. 40% were women, 45% were disabled. So they really tried to reach out to women. And in this case, the UNICEF was partnering with them to promote COVID-19 appropriate behavior, prevention of stigma and discrimination. And the bottom 2 boxes are merely to give you an idea of the scope of this project. They were reaching 3.2 million people, engaging 426,000 people. And look at the number of partnerships. It is huge. As I was saying earlier, when we are coming to South Asia, it's a lot about numbers and complexities. All right, so what did we do? So when we started, we said, all right, you tell us what you think your project is about. And we used this gender scale. I think all of you are familiar with that, from gender discriminatory, gender blind, sensitive, responsive to transformative. So when they started, the implementing partners said, we're gender transformative. We're working towards the empowerment of women as entrepreneurs. We are trying to reduce the gendered digital divide. So I said, sure, let's dive in and look at the gender analysis. This is the analysis that we did, and I'm sharing this with you. The areas of analysis that we went into, okay, what was the training like? It was COVID-related health messages. The male Suchnapreneurs were said to be told, you be empathetic towards women, but there was no discussion on male entitlement, no discussion on power. What was the analysis? Maybe gender neutral or negative. What was the content of the messages? Mostly about stigma and discrimination, gender neutral. nothing specific to what women were facing. And we know what women faced during COVID. What was the content of the messages? Okay, about pregnant lactating mothers, SRHR for adolescents, gender sensitive. IEC materials had no mention of the violence and the stereotypes that we knew was, impacted during COVID, gender neutral. So what was the result? When we dug deep and had a few focus group discussions, we found that the women Suchnapers they informed us that it was very difficult to target men, even though they were moving in the communities. And especially the boys and men who were in leadership positions, the village leaders, mostly men, even for the COVID messages. And so they generally landed up talking to young boys. So gender neutral or negative. So we worked with the implementing partners and with UNICEF to understand a very deep dive and analysis. Is this gender transformative? Where are we at? So if you look at the results, this project exceeded the targeted reach with the COVID messages. If you look at it, 40% were women, including those with disability. If you looked at the results, fantastic. They had reached all the targets, but the gender analysis, as we just saw, well, perhaps the strategy was more gender neutral. The women were selected for their commitment and education. You were being very selective. The activities were maybe gender sensitive at best. Were the results gender responsive? We had to question that. So what did we do next? Well, we worked with the partner to make the program more responsive and transformative, because that's what a feminist evaluator does. You don't just make a judgment and say, this is where it is and this is where we are going, the analysis shows. But as advocates, as change agents, as feminist evaluators, we also talk about the pathways to change. So that's the difference between an evaluator and a feminist evaluator. So what were some of the key learnings? Well, if you want to be a feminist evaluator, the partner has to work with you. There has to be a partnership. It's absolutely critical that there is ownership of the process, findings, and action. And we have to do a gender analysis, not just at the end, strategy level, activities, outputs. We have to dig deep. And gender analysis is an iterative process. It's different for different stages, how we are doing it, and so on and so forth. So it's a journey. This is what they told us when we completed the case study. And they said, we need to write together, enjoy that ride, but it's a journey. We came up with 5 feminist principles that was validated by the UNICEF Gender Network. And I'll provide a link for other case studies that we also did in the region. We used different frameworks for that. And we came up with these 5 ones. And Donna, I hope they resonate with also some of your principles. I'm sure they do. We're both feminists. So one is the voices of the most disadvantaged. Ask a question. Have we reached the most vulnerable? Social justice. Have we addressed structural inequities, the patriarchy, the traditional structures, and intersectionality? How inclusive are we? What steps have we taken for diverse inclusion? What about participation? Who owns this initiative? Have we valued diverse perspectives? Who's making the decisions? And decisions everywhere, from planning to design to monitoring, evaluation. What about reflection? Have we learned from our successes and challenges? So we came up with these, and they were endorsed across the UNICEF Gender Network. I'm going to talk about one more example, and I wanted to demonstrate that you can take any evaluation approach and engender it. And it does make a huge difference when you look at it for programming, scaling up, whatever the purpose of the evaluation is. So I feel that you have the tools, you have the frameworks, you have the approaches. Use it, put on your gender lens. So this example is coming from Assam, and I'll explain where that is in India. And in this project, there were 3 organizations involved. So we had, this is Nasdik. It was a legal empowerment institution working for safe motherhood. And because it was legal, they were fighting for legal rights, for maternal rights, and so on. And then you also had the International Center for Advocates Against Discrimination, a global organization, ICAT, which was talking about digital literacy. How can we use geomapping and digital tools to advocate for rights? And then we had another organization, which is called PAJRA. This is the community-based organization, and they worked with Adivasis. We call them Adivasis. In other parts of the world, we call them indigenous populations. So they were the grassroots ones. So you had legal, a grassroots, and somebody who worked on digital rights. What would they do? So you have some, I have just some links to some of their work. And they were supported by ISIF Asia, which works in the Asia Pacific, and they provide innovation grants to organizations around Asia Pacific. And again, one of the funders was IDRC. And because it was IDRC, they wanted a utilization-focused evaluation approach. And I'll talk about how you can engender any evaluation approach that you work on. Okay, so this is Assam. It's tucked into the northeast corner of India. It has one of the highest maternal mortality rates. Existing facilities are very under-equipped. I had some photographs of that, but I wasn't sure I can share it, so I haven't included those facilities. But believe me, they're extremely under-equipped. Most women belong to this indigenous community, and tea gardens are vast. So they are isolated, they don't have access. By the way, Assam is one of the biggest tea growing areas in the world. So when you have that cup of tea, it's probably coming from Assam. And it's been picked by these women that you see. So we looked at what was the project trying to do. Provide smartphones to women and train them in using SMS. Build capacity about health rights and violation codes. So they punch in a code for every particular violation. And these women reporters, as they were then called, would send the SMSs. These violations were verified and geomapped in real time. And because it's a legal organization, one of them, Nasdeek, they needed to have evidence of the number and type of health violations documented. So there was a geomap available. And then they were hoping that with this information, the health authorities are going to act on it, because now there's evidence. The women's capacity is going to use ICT will improve. Women will demand their rights. Quality maternal facilities accessible and available for tea garden workers. We've changed the world. Maternal health rates are gone. What happened? In spite of the best efforts, very few women were reporting these maternal health violations. Repeated trainings and follow-up, you are not getting the figures that you wanted. So let's look at how would you do it in a conventional evaluation. So at first, when we came in and they were looking at, when they evaluated the project, they said, okay, let's release the low reporters, the tea garden workers. Let's have another selection criteria, younger, more educated from the villages, so not in these vast, isolated tea garden areas, but in the periphery. Let's have monthly meetings to refresh the codes, and let's give more assistance, so that there is more information available. Very conventional evaluation. I came in with the UFE framework, which is what IDRC was promoting, but then coming in as a feminist evaluator with a gender lens, said, let's look also at the structural inequities, and let's look at what real change can we bring in their lives. Let's make a difference. So in practice, you can see the questions on the left hand and the right hand. The left hand were the conventional UFE key questions. Yes, you were asking about the participation of women who use the mobile phones to report violation. But if you look at the feminist lens, look how nuanced we begin our questioning. We're asking, do marginalized women, the tea garden workers, do they know about their health rights? What are their barriers? Why aren't they communicating? When there are health violations, which women are having the greatest difficulty reporting and why? We want to dig deep to understand that. Look at the next key question of UFE. How do the women whose rights have been violated, frontline health workers, health facility staff, and community, how do they perceive the change in the project? It's very possible the changes are looked at absolutely differently from different stakeholders. And so with the feminist lens, we said, okay, Has this tracking of violations led to a change in awareness of maternal health rights? Do communities recognize women's roles? Are women's voices heard and acted upon by decision makers in health services, even when they report? What suggestions do women have to improve the project results? So recall this slide that I started with. Let's understand their lived realities and what's happening. So let's look at that same theory of change. And we started examining the assumptions. These assumptions are there, but we did not examine them in a conventional evaluation. The first one, smartphones and ICT innovation are important for timely reporting of violations. Yes. Women who have never used smartphones will learn to do so. Yes. Women know their entitlements and recognize health violations. No. Women have self-esteem and confidence to report and question. No. Other women inform them about violation? Very little. Family members support women in their work? Very little. Government positively acts on the information provided by the women? No. So we started questioning these assumptions coming from this deep dive that we did. And we came up with that when you do look at decision making and you add the feminist lens, and that photograph on the right-hand side explains what was happening. These indigenous tribes in the 1800s were brought from neighboring states by the British to work on the tea plantations, isolated, disenfranchised, and they've lived for more than 100 years in a similar situation, isolated, but great workers to pluck the tea in the gardens. There was a culture of silence, structural hierarchy of power that existed, and the question of entitlements. And there is one issue that is really important when we look at gender transformation. Understand that there is self-stigma. We cannot talk about empowerment from the outside, empowerment inside. There is a lot of self-stigma, and we have to work through that.
Dear Sonal,
yes,
I am very sorry to interrupt, but please, we need to close. So if you can.
Yes, I'm done. I'm done. So when we look at feminist lens, we strengthen the women volunteers about their rights and entitlement and review the roles of the high performance volunteers and made them paralegals. This was the change that we brought forward, and a communication strategy to collaborate with the government that was completely isolated from the information. So 3 areas for feminist approach: context, culture, and power. You have to address these 3 if you want to be a feminist evaluator. So thank you very much. And sorry if I have run over a bit of time. These are some of the references to the evaluation that's available. The UNICEF one received an award for evaluation for transformation. And the other one is also there in a book that's come out from India. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you, Sonal. Indeed, you took more time than expected, but it was very, very, very interesting. So it's a very nicely used time. Thank you very much for your generosity to share your experience and learnings, which are sure very helpful for us. The chat's on fire, many conversations, many questions, many comments. So I'm very happy to see that. And now I will pass the floor to my colleague Dugan Fraser, the program manager of the Global Evaluation Initiative, to share, Dugan, please, with us why feminist evaluation is important for GEI and why it's important for you also. Please, the floor is yours, Dugan.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and thank you, everybody. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to attend the whole session. I just want to note that for me personally, feminism has been a transformative lens that has allowed me to grow and given me so many mechanisms through which I can overcome the privilege and the isolating effects that being a tall white man have. And for me, feminism has been a way of decentering myself and allowing myself to come to understand better that life is very different for different people. But for the GEI, more importantly, I think what feminism does is it gives our transformative ambitions a set of tools and some very practical ways of making the work that we do successful at changing systems and structures that are oppressive. And we understand this work to be enormously mobilized by feminism. And while we understand the word feminism is a controversial one and that people feel awkward about it in some places, we're very grateful for the support that we've gotten from the Canadian government to make feminism an element of the GEI strategy. And I'm going to leave it there because I know we're short of time. But I think just from what I can see in the chat box, it seems like the session was on fire. And I'm very grateful to have an opportunity and to thank our speakers, Sonal, Donna, and Donna. Thank you so much. And Megan and Claudia, thank you for your amazing facilitation. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Dugan, for highlighting how important feminist evaluation is for our team and for our work. And thank you very much, as Dugan just said, to our panelists today. It was a very inspiring session. We have lots of things to think about to empower ourselves to be feminist evaluators, or each time a little bit more feminist evaluators. Thank to each one of the participants today. It was a great session. I hope most of the questions got answered, and otherwise we can keep discussing about them in further webinars that we will be hosting for GEI and overall during the gLOCAL Evaluation Week. There are many, many other events to come, so please find those that you want to join, and we'll see you there. A big hug for each one of you, and enjoy the rest of your day.